A poor-looking man walked into the hotel, and the entire staff despised him, except for one woman. The late afternoon sun cast golden beams over the sleek glass facade of the Silver Heights Hotel, one of the most luxurious establishments in the city. Valets in pristine uniforms moved swiftly across the cobblestone driveway, opening doors for arriving guests in tailored suits and designer dresses. The marble floors inside the grand lobby gleamed under the massive chandelier hanging from the high ceiling. Everything about the place spoke of elegance, wealth, and exclusivity. Amid the steady rhythm of luxury and polished decorum, a jarring note suddenly sounded. The front doors parted once more, but this time not for a guest stepping out of a limousine or a town car. Instead, a man entered on foot. He was tall and broad-shouldered, but his posture was slightly hunched, as though he was used to keeping his head down. His clothes were torn at the sleeves and dirt-streaked along the hem. His jeans were baggy and faded, the knees ripped open from wear. His boots, heavy and scuffed, left faint marks on the spotless floor. He wore a hoodie, pulled low over his face, casting it in shadow. The lobby grew quieter, not silent, but tense, like a string being pulled taut. One of the receptionists was the first to react. A young man named Greg, impeccably dressed in his black suit and gold name tag, straightened up with alarm. He leaned over the front desk toward the security guard nearby, nodding in the direction of the man who had just entered. "Excuse me, sir," Greg called out, voice raised and sharp. "This is a private property. Guests only." Jake didn't respond right away. He stood just a few feet inside the entrance, quietly observing the opulence around him. The chandelier, the velvet furniture, the marble fountain gently burbling in the center of the lobby. There was no fear or awe in his eyes, only patience. A second employee, older and more aggressive, stormed out from behind the desk. "You need to leave, now," he said firmly, walking toward Jake with quick, heavy steps. "You can't loiter here. This isn't a shelter." Jake looked at him slowly, lifting his hood just a bit. His face was calm, his expression unreadable, but his dark brown eyes locked onto the man with a steadiness that made him stop short. More voices joined in. Two other employees began murmuring behind the desk, casting judgmental glances and whispering loudly, enough for anyone nearby to hear. The tension in the lobby swelled. It was, after all, a big day. The hotel was awaiting its new owner, an investor who had bought out the previous management in a surprise deal. Staff had been preparing all week for the visit, dusting every corner, polishing every surface. The last thing they wanted was a homeless man disrupting the image of perfection. "Security!" Greg called again, louder this time as a pair of uniformed guards appeared from the hall near the elevators. They moved quickly, but with restraint, still unsure how to proceed. That was when Maria stepped forward. She had been arranging flower bouquets at a side table when she noticed the commotion. A housekeeping supervisor in her early 30s, Maria had been working at the Silver Heights for nearly a decade. She knew the rhythm of the place better than most, and though she kept a low profile, she had a keen sense of justice that never wavered. "Wait," she said, stepping in front of the guards. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. "Maybe he's not lost. Maybe he needs help. Or maybe he's here for a reason." The staff around her blinked. Greg scoffed. "Maria, don't be naive. Look at him." "I am looking," she said quietly, "and I don't see someone dangerous. I see a man who hasn't been treated like a human being since he walked in." The older receptionist frowned. "This isn't your job, Maria. Stay in your lane." She turned to Jake then. "Sir, can I help you with something? Are you here to see someone?" Jake tilted his head. His voice, when it came, was deep and steady. "Not yet," he said, "but I will be." "Excuse me?" Maria asked, unsure of his meaning. Before he could respond, a new voice cut through the lobby like a blade. "What is going on here?" The hotel manager, Miss Langford, descended the stairs from the mezzanine level in heels that clicked with authority. Her suit was sleek and sharp, her hair pinned tightly into a bun. She scanned the scene in seconds and narrowed her eyes at Maria. "Why are you talking to this man?" she demanded. "Security, remove him immediately. He does not belong here." Maria stepped aside, but not away. "Ma'am, he hasn't done anything. He's just standing here. He hasn't threatened anyone." Miss Langford's eyes hardened. "That is not your concern, Maria. This is a five-star hotel. We have an image to maintain. I won't have some street vagrant frightening guests on the same day the new owner is expected to arrive." "I understand that," Maria said calmly, "but he still deserves to be treated with respect." Miss Langford stepped closer, voice low and sharp. "If you defy me on this again, you will be written up. Do it a third time and you will be unemployed. Are we clear?" Maria's lips parted slightly as if to speak again, but she held herself back. Her cheeks flushed with silent rage, but she gave a tiny nod. "Clear," she said. Jake was silent through all of this. He looked from Maria to Miss Langford and back again. Then he turned calmly and walked away, past the guards, past the reception desk, and into one of the side hallways as though he belonged there. Miss Langford's jaw clenched. "Where do you think you're going?" she barked. Jake didn't answer. He didn't need to, because just then a black town car pulled up outside. A tall man in a tailored suit stepped out and walked in through the glass doors. He looked around, then addressed the lobby with a formal tone. "I'm looking for Mr. Jake M. Sanders, the new owner." Silence fell like a curtain. Every face turned. Greg's mouth opened and closed. Miss Langford blinked rapidly. Maria's eyes widened. And then Jake stepped back into view. Calm, silent. He reached into the inside of his ragged coat and pulled out a small leather wallet. From it, he produced a sleek black card and handed it to the man in the suit. "That's me," he said. The man nodded. "Mr. Sanders, welcome. Your office is ready. Shall I escort you upstairs?" Jake turned towards the stunned crowd. His voice was measured and clear. "No need," he said. "I know the way." The air in the lobby remained suspended in stunned silence, as though time itself had forgotten how to move. No one spoke. No one even breathed, it seemed. All eyes followed Jake as he walked slowly past the front desk, his heavy boots now sounding not like an intrusion, but a statement of presence. The man in the tailored suit, who had identified himself as part of the legal team representing the new ownership, remained still for a moment before following Jake with respectful distance. It took a full 30 seconds after Jake disappeared around the corner for the staff to stir again. Greg looked pale, the smug superiority having drained from his face, replaced by something far more unstable: fear. The older receptionist's mouth was open, but no sound came out. Miss Langford, to her credit, did not let her mask of composure crack easily, but her eyes darted nervously in the direction Jake had gone. Maria remained frozen, her hands still clenched at her sides, not in fear, but in a confused sort of awe. The entire scene had been a reversal of everything the staff thought they understood about their world. In their minds, a man who dressed like Jake, who walked like Jake, who entered without announcement, could not be a man of power. And yet, he had not only belonged in that lobby, he owned it. The reality of that fact disrupted the carefully ordered hierarchy they'd built around appearance, protocol and prejudice. Upstairs, Jake entered the executive wing of the hotel, where a newly renovated office waited for him. The man in the suit, his assistant, Mark, opened the doors and gestured him inside. Jake stepped past him without a word. He removed his coat slowly, revealing a simple black t-shirt underneath, the muscles of his arms taut from years of manual labor rather than gym sculpting. He looked around the office. Leather chairs, glass conference table, a private bar in the corner. He approached the desk, ran a hand along its polished surface, then turned to face the wide windows that offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. Mark cleared his throat carefully. "Would you like to proceed with the meeting schedule as planned, Mr. Sanders, or shall we make adjustments?" Jake didn't turn around. "We'll keep it," he said, "but I want to speak with the manager first, alone." Mark nodded. "I'll send for her." Back downstairs, Miss Langford was frantically trying to recover her equilibrium. She turned to the receptionist staff with clipped urgency. "You didn't know," she said, almost as if accusing them. "You didn't verify who he was." Greg stammered. "Ma'am, he didn't look. He wasn't expected today. We didn't get a photo. We thought—" "You thought," she snapped. "That's the problem. You thought you knew what a man of importance looks like." Maria watched this unfold from a few feet away, saying nothing. She wasn't interested in watching Langford squirm. Her heart was still back in the moment when Jake looked at her and smiled. It hadn't been the smile of a man reveling in triumph. It had been gentle, grateful, almost sad. A bellhop approached nervously and handed Miss Langford a note. She read it, her lips tightening. "He wants to see me," she said coldly. Maria couldn't help the small flicker of satisfaction that flared inside her. But she also felt uneasy. She didn't know who Jake really was or what he had planned. She just knew that the man she'd defended was not what others assumed him to be. Upstairs, Jake sat at the desk, his fingers steepled in thought as he waited. When the knock came, he didn't respond. Mark opened the door and ushered Miss Langford in. She stepped inside, her heels once again announcing her presence, though this time their rhythm was hesitant. "Mr. Sanders," she said, her voice carefully neutral, "welcome to the Silver Heights. I must apologize for the misunderstanding earlier." Jake raised a hand and she stopped speaking. "Sit," he said. She obeyed, sinking into the chair across from him. "You've been managing this hotel for how long?" 7 years, she said quickly, "since the previous owner acquired the property." Jake nodded slowly. "And in those 7 years, how many guests have you personally turned away based on how they look?" She hesitated. "Sir, I assure you—" "Answer the question." I wouldn't say I've turned anyone away based solely on appearance," she said, "but of course we have standards. This is a high-end establishment. We have to make judgments quickly, for the sake of our reputation." Jake leaned forward. "Your judgment today almost cost you your job." Her throat tightened. "I understand." "No," he said, "you don't." He stood, walked around the desk, and leaned against the edge in front of her. "I grew up in a part of this city you wouldn't drive through with your doors unlocked," he said. "I know what it feels like to walk into a room and have people assume you don't belong. I know what it means to have your worth decided by your clothes, your skin, your silence." He paused, his voice lowering. "What you did today wasn't a mistake. It was a reflex. That's more dangerous." Miss Langford opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jake turned and walked to the window. "You're lucky," he said, "because I'm not firing you, not yet. But that might change. I'll be watching you, closely. And if you treat anyone else the way you treated me, you'll be gone." She nodded stiffly. "Understood." "Good. You can go." She rose, rattled but composed, and left the room without another word. Jake didn't move for several minutes. He watched the cars winding down the avenues far below. Then, quietly, he whispered to himself, "Still the same city." Downstairs, Maria had returned to her duties. She wasn't one to gloat or to celebrate someone else's embarrassment, even if it was deserved. But she couldn't stop thinking about Jake. Something about the way he carried himself, the restraint, the quiet dignity. Her thoughts were interrupted when her supervisor called her to the back office. She walked in, expecting new instructions for the day. Instead, she found Mark waiting there with a sealed envelope. "Mr. Sanders asked me to deliver this to you," he said. Maria blinked. "To me?" "Yes, personally." She took the envelope, opened it, and read the note inside. "Maria, you were the only one who saw me. Thank you. Let's talk soon. Jay." She stared at the words for a long time, heart pounding, not out of fear or confusion, but a strange mixture of pride and curiosity. Meanwhile, Jake returned to his desk, where a new schedule had been laid out for him. He was the owner now, and with ownership came responsibility, not just for the building, but for the people in it. He intended to change the way this place worked, not just its profits, but its principles. But first, he intended to keep a promise. He picked up the phone and dialed the internal line. "Front desk," came the voice. "Tell Maria to meet me in the garden courtyard," he said. 10 minutes. He hung up, stood, and pulled on a fresh shirt. Still plain, still unassuming, but clean. His reflection in the glass was the same man who had walked in earlier. But now the building knew who he was, and it would never see him the same way again. He walked through the hallway, not like a guest or a stranger, but like a man reclaiming something that had always been his. And out in the courtyard, where the flowers bloomed and the stone benches caught the last light of day, he waited, not as the owner of a hotel, but as a man who had finally been seen. Maria took slow steps toward the courtyard, the envelope still tucked inside her pocket. Her hands, usually confident and skilled from years of tireless work, felt uncertain now. Her shift had technically ended, but something told her this moment wasn't bound by schedules. Her mind replayed the events of the day, trying to make sense of how a man who had been treated like a trespasser just hours ago had revealed himself as the owner of one of the most prestigious hotels in the city. More than that, he had seen her. He had acknowledged her kindness, her decision to stand against the grain. That one small act had not gone unnoticed. The garden courtyard was empty when she arrived, bathed in amber sunlight that filtered through the wrought iron lattice above. Neatly trimmed hedges framed a stone pathway leading to a small fountain in the center. The air smelled of jasmine and warm brick. Maria paused at the entrance, smoothing her blouse and tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. She felt out of place in the serene setting, even though she'd helped maintain it for years. Today, everything was different. Jake sat on a bench near the fountain, elbows resting on his knees, looking down at the rippling water. He was dressed in clean, simple clothes, a dark cotton shirt and jeans, still no suit, no tie, no performance. When he looked up and saw her, a faint smile curved at the corner of his mouth. He stood as she approached, not out of formality, but out of respect. "Thank you for coming," he said. Maria nodded, unsure whether to address him formally. "Of course. You asked." "You can call me Jake," he said. "I don't go by, sir." "Not unless someone's trying to sell me something." She laughed softly, the tension in her shoulders loosening just a bit. "Okay, Jake." He motioned for her to sit, and they both settled on the bench, side by side, but not too close. A few moments passed in silence, not awkward, just thoughtful. "I wanted to thank you in person," he said at last. "What you did in that lobby, most people wouldn't have. It takes something more to speak up when everyone else is pointing in the other direction." Maria hesitated, her voice quiet. "I didn't know who you were." "I know," he replied. "That's what made it matter." She looked at him, eyes narrowing in curiosity. "So, why did you come in like that, looking the way you did?" He leaned back slightly, eyes turned to the canopy of vines above them. "Because I needed to see this place for what it really is. Not the glossy photos, not the polished brochures. I wanted to know how people were treated when they didn't have anything to offer, how they were seen or not seen." Maria considered this. "That's a bold way to start," he chuckled. "Some would say reckless, but I've lived enough of my life on the outside to know what it feels like. I needed to know if this hotel was built on service or on show." She gave a small nod. "Well, now you know." Jake turned to face her more fully. "Yeah, and I also know there are people here who care. People like you." Maria shifted, a flush creeping up her neck. "It wasn't anything heroic." "Don't downplay it," he said gently. "You stood between me and people who outranked you. That's not small." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she stared at the fountain, the water catching slivers of light. Then she spoke, her voice laced with something older than the day itself. "I've been working here for almost 10 years. I know the rules, I know the looks. I've seen how they treat people who look like they don't belong. I'm not rich, I'm not powerful, but I can still choose to treat someone with dignity. That's the one thing I still control." Jake was silent for a moment, absorbing her words. Then he said, "You ever think about running a place like this?" Maria laughed outright this time. "Me? No, I barely survive management meetings. I'm just good at making things look nice." "You're good at leading," Jake said. "That's different." She looked at him, genuinely surprised. "Are you offering me a promotion?" "I'm offering you possibility," he said. "I'm not here just to run this place. I'm here to change it. And I need people who see more than the surface." She met his gaze, searching for a hint of insincerity, but finding none. "That's a lot to think about." "Take your time," he said. "This isn't about favors. You earned my respect before you knew I had anything to give. That counts more than you know." They sat in companionable quiet again. The city beyond the walls of the courtyard buzzed with motion, but here it felt like a different world. Maria suddenly realized she was breathing easier than she had all day. Jake stood after a while. "I've got a few more fires to put out," he said, "but I meant it. Let's talk more. And thank you again." Maria stood too. "You're welcome." He nodded and walked away, not with the air of someone who owned the world, but with the calm confidence of someone who knew his place in it, and chose to share that place with others. Back in the lobby, word had spread like wildfire. Employees whispered in corners, uncertain of their future. Some were already justifying their actions from earlier, trying to rewrite their own narratives. Greg, especially, kept glancing toward the office elevators, sweat beading at his temples. In the staff lounge, a cluster of housekeepers gathered around Maria as she returned, their voices curious and eager. "Is it true?" one asked. "You talked to him? Like, for real?" Maria gave a small tired smile. "Yeah, I talked to him." "What did he say?" "That he sees people," Maria replied. "That he remembers what it's like to be invisible." The others fell silent. Some looked away, others nodded slowly. Something in the hotel was shifting, not just in ownership but in spirit. Jake spent the next several hours walking the halls with Mark, introducing himself to the senior staff formally, holding meetings, taking notes. He made no grand announcements, no threats, no promises. But everywhere he went, his presence challenged assumptions. He asked bellhops how long they'd been with the company. He checked in with the kitchen crew. He asked about schedules, overtime, grievances. Not once did he demand deference. Later that night, long after the guests had retired to their rooms and the lobby lights had dimmed to a soft glow, Jake stood alone on the rooftop terrace. The city stretched before him in all its glittering complexity. He could have been anywhere. He had the means, the freedom, the leverage, but he had chosen this place for a reason. He remembered being 16, standing outside this same hotel with a delivery bike, watching people in suits pass him like he didn't exist. He had promised himself that day that if he ever made it, he would come back, not for revenge, but for restoration. Now he was here, and it was only the beginning. Below, in her small apartment just blocks from the hotel, Maria sat on the edge of her bed reading the note again. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in years, she felt something stir in her chest that hadn't visited her in a long time. Hope. The following morning dawned with a restless kind of energy. Clouds had gathered over the city sometime before sunrise, heavy and uncertain, casting a pale light through the windows of the Silver Heights Hotel. Inside, the halls were already stirring, cleaners sweeping silently, concierge staff straightening their ties, trays clinking gently as room service moved through the corridors. The elegance remained, but beneath it, a current of tension swirled unseen, weaving itself into the polished routine. Jake sat in his new office earlier than expected. The desk before him remained largely untouched, its drawers empty, its surface blank. He hadn't yet brought in anything personal. It didn't feel right yet. He needed to know the soul of the place before decorating it. The hotel might bear his name on paper, but he understood deeply that ownership was not the same as trust, and he had no illusions that one day of revelation would be enough to transform long-established dynamics. Real change required time, confrontation, and discomfort. He looked out the window as the first drops of rain began to patter against the glass. The city blurred, buildings smeared into one another like paint. Jake's jaw tightened. Today wouldn't be easy. The knock on his door came precisely at 8. It was Mark, holding a clipboard stacked with memos, schedules, and messages from department heads. "Morning, sir," he said. "Several updates. Maintenance is requesting approval for a supply vendor switch. Legal forwarded a draft of the revised employee contracts. Also, HR has a request." Jake raised a hand slightly, a gesture that was quickly becoming characteristic of him. Quiet, composed, firm. "We'll get to those," he said, "but I want to start the day differently." Mark blinked. "How so?" Jake stood, walked around the desk, and grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair. "I want to go where I'm not expected." He left the office without further explanation, his steps echoing down the corridor. Mark, caught off guard, scrambled to follow, balancing the clipboard as he nearly jogged behind. Jake headed first to the employee locker rooms, a place where management rarely ventured unless conducting an inspection. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the walls bore the scent of detergent and sweat. As he entered, conversation ceased. Housekeepers, porters, and maintenance staff turned in surprise, some instinctively straightening their postures. No one knew how to react. Jake looked around until he spotted a middle-aged man repairing a wheeled laundry bin near the back wall. The man wore a faded gray shirt, his hands thick with calluses. "Mornin'," Jake said. The man gave a wary nod. "Mornin', sir." Jake crouched beside him, inspecting the wheel he was replacing. "Loose bearings?" The man blinked. Yeah. Happens a lot." Jake nodded. "Used to fix those myself. You gotta reinforce the frame or it'll keep coming loose." The man narrowed his eyes. "You worked maintenance?" "For 3 years," Jake replied, "before I got into real estate." Silence lingered, then the man gave a slow, skeptical smile. "You don't look like any owner I ever met." "I'm not like most of them," Jake said, standing. "Name's Jake." "Luis," the man replied, standing too. Jake offered his hand. Luis took it, gripped strong. A murmur passed through the room. Conversations restarted, quieter this time, more curious than cautious. Jake stayed a few more minutes, asking names, listening to complaints, making no promises, just being present. Later that morning, Maria stepped off the service elevator carrying a clipboard and a tray of flower arrangements. She'd been asked to oversee a new decor rotation for the executive suites. Her heart skipped slightly when she saw Jake standing at the far end of the hall, deep in conversation with a young bellhop. It was still strange, seeing him here in this context. The previous owner had been aloof, visible only through monthly newsletters or the occasional distant glance. Jake, by contrast, was everywhere. He noticed her immediately and waved her over. "Maria," he said, as if her name came easily to him now. "You busy?" "Just replacing some vases," she said, motioning to the tray. "Nothing urgent." "Good," he said. "Walk with me." They moved together down the corridor, the faint scent of roses and eucalyptus trailing behind them. "Management's holding a staff review meeting this afternoon," he said. "I want you there." She glanced at him, surprised. "Me? I'm not management?" "You should be," he said simply. She frowned. "Jake, I'm honored, really, but I don't think—" "You don't have to say anything," he interrupted. "Just listen. Be in the room. That's the first step." Maria hesitated. Her instinct was to defer, to shrink back into the background she knew so well. But something inside her stirred. The same thing that had made her speak up in the lobby. The same thing that had made Jake smile. "All right," she said. "I'll be there." When the meeting began that afternoon, the conference room was packed. Department heads lined the long table: reception, concierge, kitchen, security. Jake stood at the head, flanked by Mark, who tapped away at a tablet. "I know this wasn't on your schedules," Jake began, "but it's important." The managers exchanged wary glances. "I want to talk about culture," Jake said. "Not sales, not bookings, not occupancy rates. Culture." There was a pause. Then a woman from the front desk department cleared her throat. "Culture, sir?" "Yes," Jake said. "The way we treat people, not just guests, each other." A ripple passed through the room. Several looked uneasy. A few rolled their eyes discreetly. "Yesterday," Jake continued, "I walked into this hotel dressed in old clothes, no announcement, no entourage, and I was met with hostility. I was judged, dismissed, and nearly escorted out." The room stiffened. Maria, seated near the back, watched closely. "Only one person treated me with respect," Jake said, looking toward her. "One person acted on instinct, not protocol, and that told me everything I needed to know about how this place runs." The concierge manager raised his hand slightly. "Sir, if I may, your arrival was unconventional. Our staff reacted to a potential security concern." Jake's expression didn't waver. It wasn't about safety. It was about appearance. I'm not interested in excuses. I'm interested in solutions. No one spoke. Jake took a breath. Things are going to change. I'm instituting new training protocols. We're bringing in equity consultants, and I'll be working directly with HR to review staff evaluations, past and future. Fairness isn't optional. It's the standard. The room fell into stunned silence. And one more thing, he said. Starting today, we're launching an internal mentorship program. Employees from all levels can apply. Maria will be helping me pilot it. Heads turned. Maria felt her face flush, but held her gaze steady. Jake continued. This hotel is only as strong as the people who run it. That means every voice matters, especially the ones that have been ignored the longest. When the meeting ended, the staff filed out in murmurs, some skeptical, some impressed. Maria lingered near the doorway. Jake approached, speaking quietly. "You still with me?" She nodded. "Still here?" He smiled. "Good. It's going to get harder before it gets easier." She returned the smile. "I'm used to hard." That evening, as the rain thickened outside and the city lights blinked through the mist, Jake remained in his office long after dark. He had opened one of the drawers for the first time and placed inside it a single object. A framed photo of his mother, standing in front of a diner she once worked in, smiling despite the grime of her apron and exhaustion in her eyes. He stared at the photo for a long time, then closed the drawer gently. His reflection in the window looked older, more certain. The storm outside raged, but within these walls something else was beginning to take shape. Not just reform, restoration. The storm rolled into the night, sweeping over the city like a heavy breath. Lightning cracked across the darkened sky, momentarily illuminating the spires and cranes that formed the city's silhouette. Inside the Silver Heights Hotel, the world remained dry and composed, its walls thick enough to muffle the wind's howl, and its chandeliers burning undisturbed. Yet, even within the warm refuge of polished brass and velvet, something invisible was stirring, something far more persistent than rain. Jake's decisions had sent waves rippling across the hotel's long-standing structure. Word had traveled quickly. The new owner was not just unconventional, but intrusive. He asked too many questions, showed up in unexpected places, and, worst of all, treated the lowest-ranking employees as if they mattered. Among the mid-level managers, this was both puzzling and threatening. They had built careers atop the assumption that their distance from the cleaning crews and kitchen staff was part of the system's natural order. That order now teetered. Maria felt it almost immediately. The very next morning, subtle changes greeted her, a shift in tone, fewer greetings, averted eyes. In the break room, her usual seat at the corner table had been taken when she entered, forcing her to sit at a different table alone. She wasn't shunned outright, but the shift was unmistakable. Her colleagues had begun to see her differently, not as one of them, but as someone too close to power. She tried not to let it show. She focused on her work, adjusted floral arrangements, double-checked linens, and met each responsibility with the same calm diligence she always had. But it became harder to ignore the whispers. Her name was mentioned in low voices when she passed. Some suspected favoritism. Others accused her of playing the hero for show. A few even suggested she had manipulated Jake somehow, though none dared say it to her face. She didn't respond. She knew what silence cost. She also knew what it protected. Jake, for his part, noticed the shift. He had expected resistance. People rarely embraced change when it challenged their comfort, but the speed with which it surfaced surprised even him. He began walking the floors more frequently, stopping by departments without notice. Each visit was an act of both observation and solidarity, but it also brought tension. Some greeted him with stiff professionalism. Others avoided eye contact altogether. On the third day of his new routines, he entered the kitchen just after the breakfast rush. The chef, a grizzled man named Benoit, who had worked at the hotel longer than most of the staff combined, barely acknowledged him. "Chef," Jake said, nodding. "Mornin'," Benoit replied without turning from his stove. "We got a schedule to keep, unless you came to inspect the eggs?" Jake leaned against the tiled wall, arms crossed. "No inspections, just checking in." Benoit grunted. "We've been running this place for years without help from above. Now, you want to be everywhere at once. What's that about?" Jake smiled slightly, making sure no one gets left behind. The chef snorted. "Some of us like the old ways. They worked." Jake pushed away from the wall, stepping closer. "Worked for who?" That question hung in the steamy air. Benoit didn't answer. Later that afternoon, Jake met with the head of security, Raymond, a former police officer turned hotel manager. Raymond was tall, square-jawed, and always dressed with military precision. He had been particularly displeased since Jake's first arrival, though he'd maintained a careful veneer of professionalism. "You wanted to see me?" Jake asked, entering the control room. Raymond looked up from a bank of security monitors. "Yes, sir. I wanted to talk about protocol." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "There's been some confusion about guest treatment, especially unexpected visitors. Your unique approach has left staff uncertain. If we don't maintain firm standards, we risk compromising security." Jake folded his arms. "Are you talking about people who look like me?" Raymond's face didn't change. "I'm talking about unidentified persons entering high security, high areas." Jake stepped closer, voice quiet. "I walked into my own hotel and was almost thrown out. That's not security. That's bias wrapped in a policy." Raymond's jaw tightened. "With respect, sir, we can't afford to guess intentions." Jake looked at the monitors, watching employees move through the lobby in the slow grayscale. "Then maybe it's time we taught the staff to see better, not just look." There was no reply, only the faint buzz of the monitors. Maria, meanwhile, had begun her mentorship sessions with Jake. It was informal, not a structured program, just long walks through the property, quiet conversations in corners of the building, or shared coffee over maintenance reports. She wasn't used to being asked what she thought, especially not about policies or leadership. But Jake was patient. He listened, not like someone waiting to speak, but like someone building something new from every answer. He asked her about bottlenecks in laundry, about kitchen morale, about what it meant to work while being invisible. She gave honest answers, even when they hurt. He thanked her each time. One evening, as they walked through the side garden, Maria stopped by the bench they had first sat on. The jasmine had begun to wilt slightly, the season already shifting toward summer. "You know," she said, "you're making enemies." Jake glanced at her. "That doesn't worry me." "It should," she replied. "People are comfortable here. Even if the system was flawed, it was familiar." "I didn't buy this place to keep it familiar," he said. She looked at him, really looked. "Then you're going to need more than one person watching your back." He smiled. "I've got the most important one already." Their conversation was interrupted by a page from the hotel intercom. There was an issue in one of the executive suites, an urgent guest complaint. Jake responded immediately, taking the elevator upstairs. When he arrived, he found Greg at the door, flustered and red-faced. "I had it under control," Greg snapped when he saw Jake. You didn't call it in? No, the guest did. I was resolving it. Jake pushed past him, entering the suite. A middle-aged woman in a silk robe stood near the minibar, arms crossed. This man, she said, pointing at Greg, told me my issue wasn't worth interrupting his break. I asked for extra towels and a meal adjustment, nothing extravagant. Jake turned to Greg, who shifted uncomfortably. She was rude, Greg muttered. Entitled. Jake exhaled slowly. You're done for the day. We'll speak tomorrow. Greg opened his mouth to protest, but saw something in Jake's eyes that made him retreat. Jake turned back to the woman. I'm very sorry, ma'am. Your request will be fulfilled immediately, and your stay will be credited. She softened. Thank you. That's all I needed. Later that night, as Jake walked through the dim hallways toward the staff wing, he paused outside the door to the locker room. He could hear voices inside, Greg's voice among them. He's playing hero, Greg said bitterly, trying to make us look bad so he can look good. Another voice muttered agreement. He's not one of us, Greg continued. Doesn't matter how many rounds he makes, he's still pretending. Jake stood there for a moment, hand on the knob, then he let go and turned away. He didn't need to hear more. The roots of resistance were growing, but so were the roots of something deeper, something he was willing to fight for. The first hint that things were about to change came not from the boardroom or the front desk, but from the janitor's closet. It was a narrow space tucked behind the east stairwell, rarely entered by anyone other than custodial staff. Maria had gone there early one morning to collect extra cleaning supplies, as she sometimes did to avoid the congested storage rooms used by newer staff. She opened the door and reached for the shelf, but her hand froze midair as she heard voices from just outside. The door, slightly ajar, let in sound as clearly as a confession. Two men stood in the hallway, unaware of her presence. One was Greg, the other was Raymond, the head of security. I'm telling you, Greg hissed, his tone venomous, he's ruining everything. He's trying to be some kind of savior, but he's turning the place upside down. He's the owner, Raymond replied, not entirely with agreement, but with calculation. Not for long, Greg muttered. There are ways, connections. One of the partners in corporate didn't approve of this acquisition. You know that. We still have leverage. There was a long pause. Maria barely dared to breathe. Raymond's voice returned, quieter now. You talking about looking into his background? I'm saying people don't change overnight, Greg whispered. He shows up in rags, plays the part, suddenly he's the hero? There's something off. Nobody climbs that fast without stepping on someone. Maria's pulse thudded. She wanted to burst through the door, to confront them, to demand answers. But instinct told her that this was not the moment. Not yet. Later that day, she found Jake in the back kitchen, talking quietly with one of the dishwashers. His sleeves were rolled up, a dish towel draped over his shoulder. He looked more like a cook than a CEO. She waited until the conversation ended, then stepped aside with him into the hallway. I overheard something, she said, and I think you need to hear it. She told him everything, every word Greg had said, the implications, the tone. Jake listened in silence, his expression unreadable. I expected pushback, he said finally, but not this soon, or this deep. Maria hesitated. What do you want to do? I want to see who else is involved, Jake said, and then I want to bring it into the light. He didn't wait long. That evening, he called an unscheduled meeting in the conference room. Only department heads were invited. Greg and Raymond both arrived, visibly uncertain. Maria attended too, by Jake's request, though she stood near the door rather than taking a seat. Jake remained standing as well, arms folded loosely, his stance casual but resolute. "I've called you all here because I believe in transparency," he began, "and because some things have come to my attention that can't be ignored." He paused. The room waited. "There are whispers of conspiracy," Jake continued, "conversations had behind closed doors, suggesting that my presence here is temporary, that people are working to undermine what we're building." Murmurs stirred. Greg's face began to flush and Raymond narrowed his eyes. Jake turned slightly, looking at each of them. "I want to be clear. I didn't buy this hotel to tear it down. I bought it to restore it. Not just the carpets and the service, but the dignity that should be part of every role in this building. If that threatens some of you, then say so now." Silence. Except for Greg, who stood abruptly. "With all due respect," he said, barely masking his anger, "this place ran just fine before you arrived. People knew their place. The staff understood the hierarchy. You've changed that. You've made everything unstable." Jake's voice was calm. "The hierarchy was built on fear. That's not stability. That's silence. You don't know what it's like to keep this place running," Greg snapped. "You walk in here like some messiah." "I walked in here like myself," Jake said, "and that was enough to show me who really understands service and who only hides behind a title." Raymond shifted uncomfortably, but remained silent. Jake turned to the group. "Let me remind you of something. I worked for years to afford this building. I scrubbed floors, repaired pipes, took night shifts nobody else wanted. I know what it means to be overlooked, and I will not run a place that repeats that mistake." The room stayed quiet. Even Greg had no retort. Jake continued. "Anyone who cannot respect that vision is free to leave. And yes, that includes you, Greg. Your behavior these past few days, hostility, undermining your colleagues, disrespecting guests, is not the standard we uphold here. You're suspended, effective immediately." Gasps broke out around the table. Greg stood frozen for a moment, then stormed out of the room without a word. Raymond's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Jake looked to the others. "Let this be clear. This hotel is going to change, and if you're part of the problem, you will not be a part of its future." The meeting dispersed slowly, each person leaving with wide eyes and quiet steps. Maria remained until the room was empty. "You did what had to be done," she said. Jake nodded, but his eyes held shadows. That was only one head of the Hydra. The next days were turbulent. Greg's absence sparked rumors, some dramatic, some defensive. A few staff members resented the decision, others breathed easier. Maria noticed that her treatment shifted again. Some who had withdrawn now returned to her side, their skepticism replaced with cautious respect. Jake remained steady through it all. He doubled down on his rounds, checked in with every department, and kept his door open, literally. Anyone could walk in and speak with him. And many did. Some came with complaints. Others came with gratitude. A few came just to see if the legend was true, that the man in worn boots had indeed become their boss, but not all resistance was so overt. One afternoon, a small fire broke out in the laundry chute. It was contained quickly. No injuries, but the investigation uncovered a deliberate act. A rag soaked in flammable cleaner had been left where it didn't belong. Security began reviewing footage. Raymond led the inquiry with unusual silence. Jake watched closely, but said little. He suspected the message, even without proof. Pushback had taken a new shape. One night, as he walked through the service tunnel toward the staff kitchen, He paused near the wall where employee photos were mounted. Dozens of faces stared back, smiles frozen in black and white. Some had worked here for decades, others had moved on. But one thing struck him. All the senior-level portraits looked the same. Clean, polished, uniform. He turned away, his reflection caught in the glass. Different. That night, he met Maria again in the courtyard. The jasmine was gone now, replaced by early lilies. Summer had taken hold. "I've made enemies," he said. "You've made truth," she replied. "People fear that more." Jake looked at her and something deeper passed between them. An unspoken bond, forged not by title or task, but by shared conviction. In a place obsessed with surfaces, they had become mirrors of something else. Something more honest. "I don't know what happens next," Jake said. "I do," Maria said, folding her arms. "You keep going." And he would, because the storm had not passed. But now it had a name. The dawn of that final week at the Silver Heights broke with a clarity the city hadn't seen in days. After weeks of steady rain and shifting clouds, the sky stretched in an uninterrupted wash of pale blue. From the roof of the hotel, the skyline looked cleaner, newer even. It was the kind of morning that made people pause, look up, and believe, if only for a moment, that change was possible. Inside the hotel, the shift wasn't only in the light, it was in the tempo of things. More intentional footsteps, quieter gossip, hands that hesitated before pressing elevator buttons, conversations that once happened in shadows now held behind closed doors. Jake had stirred something deep, the kind of disruption that doesn't just rattle policies, but people's sense of who they are and where they stand. Maria arrived early, as she always did, her tote bag slung over one shoulder and her clipboard tucked beneath her arm. But this morning, she wasn't heading to the staff room or the flower pantry. She made her way instead to the executive suite hallway where Jake had invited her to a meeting unlike any they had had before. When she reached the top floor, the door to the private lounge was already open and Jake was waiting inside. He was dressed, as always, with simplicity. Dark jeans, a button-up shirt, and worn boots that still defied the carpet's expectations. The only thing new was the expression on his face. It was lighter. Not carefree, but clear. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, setting her things down. "I wanted to talk to you before we begin today. Something's about to happen." Maria tilted her head, reading his voice. "Something good?" Jake smiled faintly. "Something overdue." He walked to the window, hands in his pockets. "Corporate's coming today. Not the paper pushers, the ones who approved the sale, who wrote the checks. They're here to assess the transition, to evaluate if the direction we've taken is sustainable. They've been getting complaints, anonymous but easy to trace, and I expect they're here to test whether I belong." Maria's face tightened. "After everything you've done, they still question that?" Jake turned to her. "This isn't about what I've done. It's about what I look like, what I disrupt." Maria took a breath. "Then let them question it. They'll find their answer." He nodded. "They will. And I want you in that room." Her eyebrows rose. "Me? You've been my eyes and ears from the beginning. You've given me more than information. You've given me perspective. And today, I want that in front of the people who think change only comes in suits." She hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Then I'll be there." Later that afternoon, the private boardroom filled with unfamiliar faces. 3 men and 1 woman, all dressed in muted luxury. They introduced themselves as senior partners from the ownership group, their voices precise, their gazes sharp. Jake welcomed them calmly and began the presentation with Mark, laying out every decision made over the past month. Personnel changes, policy updates, mentorship programs, staff development. equity reviews. He didn't skip a detail. He didn't apologize for any of it. The questions came soon after. One of the men leaned forward, fingers steepled. "Mr. Sanders, your methods are unconventional. We've heard concerns from senior staff about morale, about disruptions to structure. Some claim favoritism." Jake met the gaze without blinking. "Favoritism isn't my policy. Fairness is. And for people who've never had a voice, fairness feels like a revolution." The woman partner spoke next. "You've removed a long-serving supervisor without standard arbitration. That doesn't align with procedural fairness." Jake nodded. "True, but that supervisor violated the dignity of guests and employees alike. We're not just managing a building. We're stewarding a culture." The partners exchanged looks. Then one turned to Maria, who had remained silent until then. "You're Maria." "I am." "You've been here how long?" "Almost 10 years." "And would you say things have improved under Mr. Sanders' leadership?" She looked around the room, then directly at them. "This is the first time in a decade I've been asked that question. That's the improvement." They were quiet. She continued, voice steady. "When Jake walked through the doors, nobody knew who he was. People saw his skin, his clothes, and they decided. But he didn't leave. He didn't retaliate. He listened. He made room. And for the first time, people who clean rooms, who fix lights, who wash dishes, they matter. Not because it's trendy, because he means it." Another pause. The partners scribbled notes. Jake stood again, folding his arms. "This hotel isn't broken because of inefficiency. It's broken because of arrogance. I'm not here to pretend I have all the answers. I'm here to rebuild from the ground up. And if that's a problem for you, I'll step aside. But if you care about longevity, about loyalty, about creating a place people are proud to enter, not just to visit, but to work, then let me finish what I started." The meeting ended without applause, without clear verdict. The partners left with brief handshakes and polite nods. Jake knew better than to expect instant approval. The kind of change he represented didn't come with ceremony. It came with endurance. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the skyline and lit the glass towers in gold, Maria found Jake again in the courtyard, seated on their familiar bench. She sat beside him, and for a while they said nothing. Finally, Jake spoke. "I came here thinking I needed to prove something." "You did," she said, "but not to them." He looked at her, gratitude softening his features. "To you?" "To yourself," she answered. He nodded slowly. "You were right, you know. I did make enemies." "But you made more than that," she said. "You made something stronger." He leaned back, eyes on the sky. "I used to think the people in power had the answers, that if I could just get where they sat, everything would make sense. And now? Now, I know the view only matters if you remember where you came from." They sat together as the lights came on around them, the courtyard warming with lantern glow. Somewhere inside, music played, soft jazz echoing faintly from the bar. Laughter drifted from the lounge. The hotel, for all its history, breathed differently now. Not because of new furniture or renovated suites, but because its foundation had shifted. It was no longer built on fear or status, but on a deeper recognition. A week later, the partners returned with their decision. Jake kept his position, not because of his presentation, but because the numbers spoke for themselves. Staff satisfaction had risen, turnover had decreased, and a dozen new 5-star guest reviews praised the warmth of service, the attentiveness, the heart. Greg didn't return. Raymond handed in his resignation quietly, replaced by a younger officer from within the team, someone Maria had once trained during his early months. In a closed-door meeting, Jake offered Maria a formal management role. She accepted, not because she needed the title, but because she knew she could carry its weight. Together, they redesigned the training programs, rewrote the staff handbook, and led the hotel into a season of restoration. Every new employee learned the story of the man who walked in with torn clothes and left an empire changed. Not every day was easy, but they were real. And for Jake, that was more than enough. On the 1-year anniversary of his first steps into the hotel, he stood again in the lobby. He wore the same jacket, though freshly cleaned. He stood near the fountain where it had all begun, and watched the doors open and close for strangers who might become something more. Maria joined him, clipboard in hand, still grounded, still clear. He looked at her and said, "We're just getting started." And this time the building didn't resist. It welcomed.